The surgeon's scalpel was already cutting when the blood pressure hit 42. Not dropping, not trending down. 42. Every monitor in OR3 screamed at once, and 11 trained medical professionals stood frozen because nothing they were doing was working. And none of them understood why. Except her. She was standing outside the operating room door in a hallway that smelled like floor wax and old coffee, her badge already confiscated, her locker already cleared, because 40 minutes ago the chief of surgery had thrown her out of his hospital. She pressed her palm flat against the cold metal door. She knew exactly what was killing him. She had seen it before. Not here, not in this sterile Montana hospital with its polished floors and committee meetings, but in a ditch outside a burning convoy, with nothing but a field kit and 4 minutes to act. And nobody inside that room was going to listen to her. Before we go further, if you've never been here before, welcome. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the stories on this channel don't go where you expect them to. Every week we drop something that will keep you up past midnight, and you will not see the ending coming. Like this video if you're already hooked, and drop a comment telling me your city and country right now. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. People are watching from places I never imagined, and every comment you leave proves it. Now, let's go back to that hallway. Let's go back to the woman with her hand on the door. Let's start from the beginning of the worst and most important day of her life. The highway patrolman who called it in said the pickup had gone off the guardrail at roughly 70 miles per hour and rolled 4 times before stopping against the rock face. That was all anyone knew when the ambulance backed into the bay at Harlow Creek Regional Medical Center, and the rear doors swung open at 6:14 in the morning. Dara Moss was already gloved when the gurney wheels hit the bay floor. She was 34, medium height, with dark circles she'd stopped trying to hide, and a habit of going still when everyone else was moving. The overnight staff called her steady. The day staff barely called her anything at all. She'd been at Harlow Creek for 2 years and had managed to remain almost invisible, which was exactly how she'd intended it. She showed up on time. She followed protocol. She helped patients. She went home to her apartment above the laundromat on Birch Street, and she didn't talk about the 7 years before nursing school, and nobody asked. The patient came off the ambulance in bad shape. Male, mid-40s, no ID, no wallet, no phone. The paramedic reeling off vitals, heart rate 118, pressure 94/60 and falling, GCS of 12, had the clipped cadence of someone who'd worked this job long enough to sound calm even when they weren't. Single vehicle rollover, no seatbelt, unresponsive at scene, responsive now, but disoriented. Obvious fractures to the right forearm, lacerations on the scalp and upper chest. We packed the chest wounds. He kept trying to tell us something in the rig. Couldn't make it out. Dara moved alongside the gurney, her eyes doing their own inventory as they pushed through the trauma bay doors. Scalp lack, bleeding controlled. Forearm, yeah, fractured, but that wasn't the priority. Chest wounds packed, respirations labored, but bilateral. She watched his abdomen as they transferred him to the bay table. It was the abdomen that stopped her. Not dramatically. It wasn't distended yet, wasn't bored rigid. But there was a subtle fullness on the left side, a slightly asymmetric presentation that most people would miss, especially when they were focused on the more obvious wounds leaking through the bandages. She put 2 fingers at the left lateral margin and pressed, gently, barely enough to constitute an assessment. The man's eyes shot open and his hand grabbed her wrist. "Don't," he said. Just that one word, hoarse and compressed, like it cost him something to produce. "Okay," Dara said, quiet and even. "Okay, I've got you. You're at a hospital." His grip didn't loosen right away. His eyes, dark, sharp, tracking her with an alertness that was inconsistent with someone who'd just rolled a truck 4 times, moved across her face like he was reading something. "Where?" he said. "Harlow Creek Regional. Harlow Creek, Montana." Something shifted in his expression. Not relief exactly, more like calculation. Then his eyes went dull and his hand dropped and the bay erupted into the controlled chaos of a full trauma activation, and Dara stepped back into her position and let the machine run. The machine that morning was being operated by Dr. Reeves Talcott. Talcott was the chief of surgery at Harlow Creek Regional, a distinction that, in a hospital of this size in a town of this size, meant something slightly different than it would at a major academic center. I was 51, silver-haired, with the kind of unearned confidence that accumulates in men who've been the most credentialed person in the room for long enough that they've stopped checking. He was technically competent, more than technically competent. He'd done good work here, but he wore his authority the way some men wore expensive watches, not to tell time, but to make sure everyone noticed. He came through the bay doors still pulling on his second glove, took one look at the patient and started issuing orders before he'd fully assessed. Chest films, 2 large-bore IVs, type and cross for 6 units, get me a thoracic surgeon on the phone. Dr. Talcott. Dara kept her voice neutral and direct. Left abdomen. I think we should get a fast exam before we focus on the chest. He didn't look at her. The chest wounds are actively bleeding. They're packed and controlled. His pressure's dropping and it's not matching the visible blood loss. The abdomen. Nurse. He did look at her then, briefly, with the particular brand of patience that isn't patience at all. I can see the chest wounds. I cannot see an abdominal injury. Let's address what we know is there before we start inventing problems. She opened her mouth. Thank you, he said, in a tone that meant stop talking, and turned back to his team. Dara stood at the foot of the bed and watched the patient's pressure read out on the monitor. 89/58. She looked at the rhythm, looked at the rate, looked at the man's skin going pale and waxy in a pattern that she recognized, not from textbooks, not from a trauma certification course she'd taken at a convention in Billings, but from actual, visceral, learned-with-consequence experience that she had spent 2 years actively suppressing. She had seen intraperitoneal hemorrhage present exactly like this. She had seen it in people who looked like they were dying from one thing while they were actually dying from something else entirely, and the ones who'd survived were the ones she'd gotten to in time. She went and got the portable ultrasound. Nobody told her to. Nobody authorized it. She wheeled the machine over, positioned it at the left upper quadrant, and put the probe to the patient's flank. And the image that came back made her stomach go tight. Free fluid. A significant amount. Not incidental, not trace. A hemorrhagic collection sitting in Morrison's pouch and extending toward the pelvis. The kind of picture that meant something in the abdomen was bleeding and had been bleeding since the crash, and was not going to stop without intervention. Dr. Talcott, firm this time. Not aggressive, but not apologetic either. I have imaging. Left-sided abdominal free fluid, significant volume. He has an internal bleed. Talcott was bent over the patient's chest, his hands applying pressure through fresh gauze. He didn't stop. Did I ask for an ultrasound? No. Then put it away. With respect, the image is... He straightened up and looked at her with an expression she would remember for a long time. It wasn't anger exactly. It was the look of a man who had decided, possibly years ago, that certain categories of input didn't require engagement. Nurse Moss. He said her name like it was a gentle correction. I have been doing trauma surgery for 23 years. This patient has significant thoracic injuries. I am going to stabilize him, take him to the OR, and address the chest. If there is an abdominal component, we will find it on the table. That is how this works. He paused. Do you understand? Around them, the rest of the trauma team had gone very quiet in the specific way that people go quiet when they're trying not to have witnessed something. Dara looked at the ultrasound screen, looked at the patient's pressure, 84/54 now, continuing to fall despite 2 units of O negative going in. Looked at the man on the table, whose face was turning the particular gray that she associated with people who were running out of time. Yes, she said. I understand. She did not put the ultrasound away. She left it exactly where it was, screen visible, image frozen, and she stayed at that bedside. Talcott had him in the OR within 18 minutes, which was actually fast, credit where it was due. Dara was not scrubbed in. She was not cleared to scrub in. She took a position at the OR window, and she watched through the glass as they opened the chest and found what Talcott expected, significant bleeding from torn intercostal vessels, a bruised lung that would need monitoring. He worked efficiently, packed the bleeding sites, controlled the intercostal damage, and the blood pressure kept falling. She watched the anesthesiologist, a compact, focused woman named Dr. Una Park, call out numbers in a voice that was getting quieter and more controlled, which in Dara's experience was the thing that happened when an anesthesiologist was starting to get scared. Pressure 68/40, Still falling. He's getting 3 units and it's not reflecting. Talcott's hands didn't stop moving. We're not done with the chest. The chest is controlled, Park said carefully. Silence from Talcott. Reeves. Park almost never used his first name. The chest is controlled and the pressure's not responding. Something else is bleeding. The pause that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds. 3 seconds during which the monitor showed a systolic of 61. Then Talcott said, "Open the abdomen." What they found when they did, what Dara had known they would find, was a torn splenic artery, partially avulsed from its origin, hemorrhaging steadily into the peritoneal cavity. The amount of blood they suctioned out in the first 2 minutes of abdominal exploration was enough to account for every hemodynamic number that hadn't made sense since the man rolled through the trauma bay doors. He nearly died on the table. His pressure hit the 30s. Park was pushing pressors, calling for the rapid infuser, doing 3 things simultaneously with the tightly controlled manner of someone who is genuinely fighting for a life. He didn't die. They tied off the artery, packed the cavity, got the pressure back up over the course of 40 brutal minutes, and by the time they were closing, the monitors were showing numbers that looked survivable. Dara was still at the window when Talcott stripped off his gloves in the OR and walked toward the scrub sink without looking up. She went to check on 2 other patients. She did not expect what happened next. What happened next was that at 10:40 that morning, Talcott's charge nurse came to find her with an expression that said she was delivering a message she didn't want to deliver. "Dr. Talcott wants to see you. Administration conference room. Now." The conference room was beige and smelled like old carpet, and the particular kind of institutional anxiety that accumulates in spaces where people get told things they don't want to hear. Talcott was already seated. Beside him was Greta Fenn, the hospital's director of nursing operations, a careful woman who wore reading glasses on a lanyard and had the energy of someone who had learned over many years to always be looking for where the liability was going to land. Talcott didn't offer Dara a seat. "You used an unauthorized diagnostic device on my patient without clearance," he said. "You interrupted an active trauma assessment and challenged my clinical judgment in front of the team, twice." Dara pulled out a chair and sat down anyway. "The ultrasound showed what the patient needed. The ultrasound showed what you wanted it to show, and you used it to undermine my authority in a critical care environment. His pressure was 61 and dropping, and the chest was controlled. I wasn't undermining you. I was telling you he was going to die." Something crossed Talcott's face, not guilt, nothing that clean, but something. It was gone immediately. "You violated the scope of nursing practice as it applies to diagnostic interpretation at this facility," he said, and the switch into formal language was itself a tell, the moment a man stops talking and starts building a record. "You acted without physician authorization, interfered with an ongoing surgical consultation, and created confusion in a sterile environment." Fenn was writing something down. "He's alive," Dara said. "You got lucky that the outcome aligned with your unsolicited intervention. That doesn't make the intervention appropriate." He leaned back slightly. "I'm recommending an immediate suspension pending a formal review by the Medical Oversight Committee, effective today." The room went quiet enough that she could hear the fluorescent light buzzing. "You're suspending me," Dara said. "Not a question. I'm recommending it. Greta will process the paperwork. You'll surrender your badge and your access card at the nursing station before you leave the building." Fenn still wasn't looking directly at her. "I'm sorry, Dara, this is a process." Dara sat with it for a moment, the way you have to sit with something before you react, because the first reaction is rarely the right one. And she'd learned that lesson in conditions considerably more extreme than a beige conference room in Montana. "The ultrasound image is time-stamped," she said, "before transport to the OR, before his pressure hit the 60s. I documented my assessment." "That documentation is part of what the committee will review," Talcott said. "I want that on record, that I said it." "Noted." He stood up, and it was clearly a dismissal. "Your badge, Nurse Moss." She surrendered it at the nursing station. The charge nurse, a steady woman named Bev Tolliver, who'd worked nights at Harlow Creek for 11 years, met Dara's eyes for a moment and then looked away. Not unkindly, just the way people look away from things they're not in a position to fix. Dara took her coat from her locker, her spare set of pens, the granola bar she'd been saving since Tuesday. She walked to the parking lot in the early October cold, her breath making small clouds in the air, and she sat in her car for a while without turning it on. She wasn't panicking. That was the thing people didn't understand about her. Panic required a certain kind of belief that you were out of options. And she had been out of options before. She had been catastrophically out of options before, in ways that would make today look like a minor inconvenience, and she had found a way through. She was angry, though. Specifically, cleanly, thoroughly angry in the way she got when something unjust happened, and there was no immediate mechanism to correct it. She drove home. She made coffee. She sat at her kitchen table and looked out the window at the gray October sky and the empty laundromat sign below. And she thought about what documentation she had, and what documentation she didn't have, and what a medical oversight committee actually looked at, and whether she knew anyone on the state nursing board, and whether any of this was going to matter. Her phone rang at 2:17 p.m. Unknown number. Montana area code, but not one she recognized. She answered because she always answered unknown calls, a habit from a different life. Dara Moss. Not a question. Male voice, measured, like someone who chose his words the way you'd choose footing on bad terrain. Who is this? My name is Callum Wick. I work for a federal agency I'll name in person, but not on the phone. The patient admitted to Harlow Creek Regional this morning, the man from the highway crash. I need you to understand that his situation is more complicated than a car accident. A pause. And I need you to understand that the people who caused his accident may already know that you're the one who kept him alive. Dara's hand was very still around the phone. Outside, a car she didn't recognize was parked across the street from the laundromat. It had been there since she got home. She hadn't consciously registered it until this exact moment. How did you get this number? She asked. We've been tracking Marcus Hale for 6 weeks, Wick said. We tracked everyone who came into contact with him today. You're the only one whose background gave us pause. She didn't respond to that. Dara, his voice shifted. Not softer, but more direct. We know who you were before Harlow Creek. We know why you left. And we know that whoever arranged that crash may be working from inside that hospital. Another pause. You need to not be alone tonight. She looked at the car across the street. Dark blue, civilian plates, engine probably running because she could just barely see the exhaust in the cold air. Those your people across the street? She asked. A brief silence. Yes. Then we should probably talk, she said. She told them to come inside. Not because she trusted them. Trust was something she extended in measured increments, and federal agents showing up the same afternoon. She got suspended from her job did not qualify for any increment at all, but because sitting across from a surveillance vehicle in her apartment window was not how she intended to spend the evening, and if these people had something to say, she'd rather hear it in a room she controlled than on a sidewalk in the cold. There were 2 of them. Callum Wick was exactly what he'd sounded like on the phone. Mid-40s, compact, with the economy of movement that came from years of working in environments where being noticed was a liability. He wore civilian clothes that were trying too hard to look casual, the kind of deliberate unremarkability that was its own kind of signal. His partner was a woman named Sable Oren, younger, darker complexion, with close-cropped hair and the specific attentiveness of someone who was memorizing the layout of Dara's apartment while appearing to look at nothing in particular. They sat at her kitchen table. She did not offer coffee. Marcus Hale, Wick said. He put a photograph on the table, a surveillance image, grainy, taken from a distance. The man in the picture was unmistakably the same man she'd stood over in the trauma bay. Operative Defense Intelligence has been under federal protection for 8 weeks following a classified operation that we're not going to detail tonight. What kind of operation? The kind that made certain people want him dead. Wick pulled the photo back. The crash was not an accident. The truck that ran him off the highway was recovered 4 miles east of the guardrail. It was stolen 3 days ago from a lot in Billings. The driver was gone. Professional exit. Dara looked at her coffee mug. She hadn't drunk from it since they arrived. Why are you telling me this? Because you saved his life this morning, Oren said. It was the first time she'd spoken. Her voice was direct, no warmth in it, but no hostility either. Just the flat precision of someone delivering facts. And because when we ran your background, what came up didn't match the woman in the nursing file. The apartment was quiet. Down below, a dryer in the laundromat finished its cycle and bumped to a stop. What came up? Dara said, not quite a question. Wick leaned forward slightly. 7 years, 3 deployments. 91 Noir, then augmented into a special operations support team. 2 commendations. A medical discharge following an incident in your 3rd deployment that is still partially classified. He paused. You've been working as a civilian trauma nurse for 2 years and apparently going to considerable lengths to keep those 2 things from overlapping. She'd known this moment would come eventually. She'd been waiting for it the way you wait for a check engine light. Not with fear exactly, but with the resigned awareness that ignoring a thing doesn't make it stop being true. What do you want? She asked. Right now, for you to understand what you're in the middle of. Wick flattened his palms on the table. Hale was moved to a secure room 2 hours ago, limited access. But someone at Harlow Creek, we don't know who yet, filed an access request for his medical records this afternoon using a third-party contractor ID that doesn't exist in your hospital's approved vendor system. Whoever tried to pull his file knew he was there within hours of admission. The cold settled into the room differently after he said that. We think someone on staff either is connected to the network that arranged the crash or is being used by them without knowing it. We're not pointing fingers yet, but the access attempt was logged at 1:47 p.m. He met her eyes. You were suspended at 10:40. Dara turned that over. The timing wasn't proof of anything, but it was the kind of coincidence that deserved attention. Talcott, she said. Not an accusation, more like setting a piece on a board. Neither of them confirmed it. Neither of them denied it. We're going to need you to do something that is going to feel counterintuitive, Oren said. We need you to stay visible. Don't disappear. Don't lawyer up. Don't make noise about the suspension yet. We need whoever is watching this situation to believe that you've been contained. Contained, Dara repeated. Sidelined, discredited, not a threat. A pause. Which is exactly what Talcott did when he pulled your badge this morning. Whether he knows it or not, he handed someone a very convenient narrative. She looked at both of them in turn. The thing about being trained the way she'd been trained was that you developed a fairly reliable sense of when you were being managed. When information was being provided specifically to move you toward a decision someone else had already made. She was getting that sense now. You're asking me to sit on my hands while someone in that hospital may be feeding information to the people who tried to kill your operative, she said, for a limited period. Yes. How limited? Days, not weeks, Wick said. We need to identify the access point before we move. If we move too fast, the connection goes dark and we lose it. He let that land. But Dara, and I need you to hear this, Marcus Hale is not stable. He's improved, but he's not out of the woods. If there's another attempt, it won't come from outside, she said, and both of them looked at her. Not while he's in a hospital with a federal flag on his file. It'll look like a complication, a medication error, a failed intervention. She paused. I've seen that before too. The silence that followed confirmed that they'd considered exactly that possibility. Which is why we want you close, Oren said. I don't have a badge. You will, Wick said, and his confidence on that point was the most interesting thing he'd said all evening. They left 40 minutes later. Dara locked the door, stood in her kitchen for a moment, then sat on the floor with her back against the cabinets, the way she used to do after bad operations when she needed a surface that wasn't a mattress and wasn't a chair and was just solid and low and immediate. She stayed there for a while. Then she got up, got out her laptop, and started going through everything she remembered about the morning. Not the emotional texture of it, not the injustice of Talcott's conference room speech, but the clinical sequence, the timestamps, the specific words she'd used when she challenged him, the specific words he'd used in return. She had kept her own notes, separate from the official documentation, a habit from her military years when you learned early that the official record and what actually happened were not always the same document. She wrote it all down. Every word. She was still at the table at midnight when her phone buzzed with a message from an encrypted app she hadn't used since she'd separated from service. No sender name, just a room number and 3 words. He's asking for you. The ICU at Harlow Creek Regional was quieter at night than the rest of the hospital. Dimmer, slower, with the specific hush of a place where everything was calibrated to not disturb people who were fighting very hard to stay alive. Dara badged in using a temporary access card that had appeared in a plain envelope wedged under her apartment door sometime between midnight and 12:30. She didn't ask how it got there. Room 14 was at the end of the corridor past the nursing station where the night nurse, a young man named Troy Bast, who'd worked nights for 6 months and still looked faintly surprised to be there every shift, glanced up at her and then looked back down with the deliberate incuriosity of someone who had been told to expect her. The man in the bed looked worse than he had in the trauma bay, which was a strange thing to observe but medically consistent. The first 24 hours after a major hemorrhagic event were often deceptively quiet before everything that the body had been compensating for started making itself known. He was pale, his arms splinted and elevated, the telltale pallor of someone who'd traded a significant portion of his blood volume for a floor drain and a cell saver machine. But his eyes were the same, sharp, tracking. "Moss," he said. He had a low voice, slightly roughened by the ventilator tube that had been down his throat for part of the surgery. "You're the one who caught it." "The ultrasound caught it. I just ran the probe." "Don't do that." He said it without irritation, just a flat correction. People who minimize what they did usually do it because they've learned that the alternative gets them into trouble. I've been doing this long enough to know that's a habit worth breaking. She pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat. "Callum Wick says you've been under protection for 8 weeks. Wick talks too much." A pause. "He's also right. 8 weeks, bad operation, worse fallout. I'm not going to tell you what the operation was." "I didn't ask." Something shifted in his face, small and fast, the adjustment of someone recalibrating an assumption. "No, you didn't." He looked at the ceiling for a moment. "I've been trying to figure out since I woke up in recovery how they knew where I was. I was off route. I changed my timeline by 6 hours. Nobody had the revised itinerary except my handler and one other contact." "Did you tell Wick that?" "First thing I said when I could put a full sentence together." His jaw tightened. "He's not telling me what he knows yet, which means he's either protecting me or protecting the investigation, and I can't tell which from in here." "Maybe both," Dara said. "Maybe." He looked at her directly. "The crash wasn't meant to kill me immediately. They hit the rear panel. That's not a kill shot. That's a destabilization. They wanted me to survive the initial impact and get taken to the nearest hospital. I think they wanted me somewhere with access points." The room felt colder. "You think the hospital was the plan," she said. "I think a car crash in rural Montana is a very clean way to get someone into a civilian medical facility with no protocol for protecting federal assets, surrounded by people who've never been vetted, where a complication would be logged as an unfortunate outcome." He stopped. His breathing was measured, deliberate, like he was managing something. "I think whoever arranged this has done it before." She sat with that. "The access attempt on your file," she said. 1:47 p.m. He didn't look surprised that she knew. "Wick told you. What does someone gain from your medical records? Current status, blood type, medication list, attending physician, shift schedules." He paused. "Floor plan orientation would come from the contractor ID, not the medical record. But the record tells you when I'm vulnerable, procedure times, sedation windows." Dara understood what he was saying. Someone wasn't just tracking whether he was alive, they were scheduling around him. "How long before they move you?" she asked. "Tomorrow, if I stabilize. Tonight, if I don't." His eyes closed briefly, then opened again. "I'm not going to stabilize by tomorrow." She looked at his vitals on the bedside monitor. Technically, he was trending in the right direction. Slowly, unevenly. But the numbers were compatible with discharge to a secure facility within 18 to 24 hours if nothing changed. "You're going to make yourself sick on purpose," she said. "I'm going to create conditions where moving me would be clinically inadvisable." He said it with the same flatness she might use to describe adjusting a medication drip, which gives us more time here to identify who made that access request. That's a dangerous thing to do to yourself when you've already lost most of your blood volume. I've had worse ideas. She stood up, looked at his chart, looked at him. "If you spike a fever, I need to know immediately." "You don't have access here." "I'll have access," she said, and she said it with the same certainty Wick had used, and for the first time since the conversation started, Marcus Hale looked at her with something that wasn't just assessment. She went home as the sun was starting to suggest itself at the edge of the mountains. She slept 4 hours. She woke up to 2 missed calls from Bev Tolliver, the charge nurse, and a text that said only, "Call me before 7. Don't come in through the main entrance." Bev Tolliver had been at Harlow Creek Regional for 11 years, which meant she had outlasted 2 chief administrators, 1 building renovation, a malpractice suit that had nearly broken the department, and 4 chief surgeons, including the current one. She had the institutional memory of the place living in her like a second skeleton, and she used it with the careful selectivity of someone who understood exactly how much power knowing things could give you, and exactly how quickly that power could turn the wrong way. She met Dara in the staff parking lot, away from the main camera coverage, with a coffee she'd brought from the break room and the look of a woman who'd spent the last 11 hours deciding whether she was willing to do what she was about to do. "I want you to know I argued against the suspension," Bev said. "Not in that room, because that room wasn't the place. But I went to Fen directly yesterday afternoon and told her the ultrasound call was right." "Fen told you to document it and leave it for the committee," Dara guessed, almost word for word. Bev wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "There's something you need to know, and I've been trying to figure out all night whether telling you makes me a participant in something I'm going to regret." She stopped. Started again. "Talcott filed his incident report at 11:15 yesterday morning. Normal timing, nothing weird about that. But at 1:30 p.m. he amended it, added a section about your pattern of insubordination that referenced 2 prior incidents that I cannot find any record of in your file." Dara went still. "He invented prior incidents." "I don't know if invented is the right word. I don't know if there's documentation somewhere that I don't have access to. But I have pulled your file, Dara, because I was the one who processed your hire, and there is nothing in it that looks anything like what he described in that amendment." "When was the access request on the patient in room 14? Bev blinked. "What?" "The access request on the patient admitted yesterday from the highway crash. The one from the third-party contractor. When was it logged?" The look on Bev's face changed in the specific way that faces change, when someone realizes that 2 separate things they've been holding are actually the same thing. "I don't have access to the contractor request logs," she said slowly. "That goes through the administrative system, not nursing." "But Talcott does." Neither of them said anything for a moment. "Dara," Bev said carefully, "what is going on?" "I can't tell you everything. I want to, but I can't." She met the older woman's eyes. "I need you to print me a copy of that incident report amendment. Both versions, original and the 130 amendment, and I need the timestamp on the amendment documented." "That's technically against—" "I know what it's technically against, and I know you know that whatever Talcott put in that amendment isn't true because you pulled my file and you know what's in it." A pause. "The patient in room 14 is not who Talcott thinks he is. And if I'm right about what's happening, this is not going to stay a hospital matter much longer." Bev looked at her for a long time. Then she finished her coffee, crushed the cup, and said, "Give me 45 minutes." The documents arrived via a secure message link at 8:52 a.m. Dara forwarded them to Wick's contact number before she even read them in full. Then she read them. The original incident report was what she'd expected. Talcott's version of the trauma bay confrontation, clinical in tone, focused on her conduct. Defensible, if infuriating. The amendment was different in character. It described a documented pattern of disruptive behavior in high-pressure clinical environments, referenced 2 incidents that had supposedly occurred in her first 6 months at Harlow Creek, and used language that was specific and confident and completely fabricated. But it was the final paragraph that made her set her phone down on the counter and stand still for a moment. The final paragraph recommended that Dara's nursing license be referred to the state board for review, citing concerns about her clinical judgment and emotional stability under pressure. She picked the phone back up. "Did you read the amendment?" she said when Wick answered. "We're reading it now." "He's not just trying to fire me. He's trying to take my license." She kept her voice even. "A state board referral could take 18 months to resolve. Even if I clear it, the record stays." "I know," Wick said. "I need you to understand what that means. That's not a tactical inconvenience. That's my career. Everything I built after I got out. That's all of it." "I understand," he said, and he sounded like he meant it, which didn't fix anything. "We're moving faster than I'd planned. The contractor ID used in the access request has been traced to a shell company in Delaware that has 3 prior flags in federal databases. We have a name we're running down." "Connected to Talcott?" A pause. "Connected to someone Talcott has financial ties to. We're not ready to draw the line yet." "How long?" 48 hours. Maybe less. She pressed her hand against the cold kitchen counter. Marcus Hale told me he thought the hospital was always the plan, that the crash was designed to get him here. We've been operating on the same assumption since last night. Then someone has already been inside Harlow Creek for longer than yesterday, she said. The access request was same-day opportunistic, but for this to work the way Hale described it, for a hospital to be a viable execution point, you need someone with ongoing access, not a contractor, someone embedded. The silence on the line had a different texture now. You think it's staff, Wick said. I think the contractor request was noise, something to look at while the real access is coming from somewhere else. She paused. Pull the medication logs for room 14. Everything that's been ordered and administered since he was admitted. Compare it to the attending's actual orders. That's a significant, I know what it is, do it anyway. Her voice came out harder than she'd intended, and she didn't soften it. If I'm wrong, you've wasted an hour. If I'm right, you're already late. She hung up. She was halfway through her second coffee and deep into reconstructing the timeline on a yellow legal pad when her door buzzer rang at 10:15 a.m. She checked the intercom camera first, another old habit, and saw a man she didn't recognize in delivery clothes carrying a flat envelope. She didn't buzz him up. She went down the stairs. Moss, he said when she opened the street door. He had the bland, efficient look of someone who delivered things for a living and had learned not to be curious about what they were delivering. Yes. Sign here. The envelope had no return address. Inside was a single page, a photograph, printed on plain paper. It showed a parking lot she recognized as Harlow Creek Regional's East Staff Lot. The image was time-stamped from 3 days ago, before the crash, before any of this. And in the photograph, standing beside a car she didn't recognize, talking with a man whose face was turned away from the camera, was Dr. Reeves Talcott. The man he was talking to was visible only from the back and side, but he was wearing a jacket that had a logo on the left shoulder, a small geometric logo that Dara had seen before. She'd seen it on the credentials badge of one of the contractors who'd tried to access Marcus Hale's file. She stood on the sidewalk in the cold with the photograph in her hand and understood that someone had sent this to her specifically, not to Wick, not to Oren, to her. Which meant someone, inside that hospital or close to it, knew what she was doing and had decided she was the right person to trust with this. Or it meant she was being led somewhere very deliberately, and the difference between those two things was something she needed to figure out before she took another step. She was still standing there when her phone rang. The number was Harlow Creek Regional's main line. She answered. Ms. Moss. The voice was Greta Fenn's, careful and official and slightly strained. I'm calling to inform you that Dr. Talcott has formally requested an emergency medical oversight committee hearing regarding your suspension. It's been scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. A pause. I want to be clear. You have the right to attend and present your case. I'll be there, Dara said. There's one more thing. Fenn's voice dropped a register. I don't know what's happening in this building right now, but something is happening. I want you to know that I'm trying to do the right thing here. Dara looked at the photograph in her hand. Then make sure the committee has access to the original incident report, the version before the 130 amendment. A very long silence. I'll see what I can do, Fenn said. The call ended. Dara went back upstairs, sat down at her table, and looked at the photograph again. Then she looked at the timeline on her yellow legal pad. Then she picked up her phone and called Wick. I need you to run something, she said when he answered. The East Staff parking lot at Harlow Creek, 3 days before the crash. There's a vehicle on camera that I need identified. She read him the partial plate that was visible in the corner of the photograph. Where did you get this? Delivered to my door 20 minutes ago. Another pause. You understand that could mean someone is using you. Or it means someone in that building is trying to get out of whatever they're in, and they think I'm the safest exit. She looked at the logo on the jacket in the photo. Either way, I need that plate. Give me an hour, he said. 40 minutes later, he called back. His voice was different, not alarmed exactly, but compressed. Changed. The vehicle is registered to a logistics company that dissolved 14 months ago, he said. But before it dissolved, it was connected to a consulting group that had 3 federal contracts, all in the defense sector, all terminated following an investigation that was never made public. He stopped. Dara. The consulting group had a medical division. They placed personnel in civilian hospitals under contractor credentials. We have 3 facilities on record. Harlow Creek is not one of them. He paused. But Harlow Creek is where Talcott transferred from 4 years ago. And the hospital he transferred from, Sutter Basin Regional in Wyoming, is on the list. The air in the room did something it hadn't done before. He brought someone with him, Dara said. We're pulling every contractor ID that's been active at Harlow Creek in the last 4 years, Wick said. This is going to take longer than 48 hours. The committee hearing is tomorrow at 9 a.m., she said. Talcott is going to walk into that room with a falsified record and a license referral recommendation, and I'm going to be sitting across from him with a yellow legal pad. We can delay the hearing. Don't. She said it fast and certain. Don't delay it. Let it run. She looked at the photograph one more time. I need him in that room. I need him confident. I need him to believe that hearing is going to go exactly the way he planned it. Wick was quiet for a moment. And then? And then I need you to make sure that when he walks out of it, there's nowhere left to go. The line was quiet for 3 full seconds. The medication logs for room 14, Wick said carefully. You were right to ask. 2 of the ordered medications were modified in the pharmacy system last night. The modifications were subtle, within therapeutic range, nothing that would have triggered an automatic alert. But the combination, at those adjusted doses over 12 hours, would have created conditions that look like a post-surgical complication. She sat down. Someone accessed the pharmacy system, she said, using a credential that belongs to a nurse who's been on leave for 3 weeks, he said. We've already pulled her. She's been in Phoenix visiting her daughter. She didn't log in. Who has access to inactive staff credentials? Department heads, Wick said, and the chief of surgery. The room was very quiet. The medications, she said. Have they already been administered? Some of them. Troy Bast flagged an anomaly on his 6 a.m. round. One of the drip rates looked off. He corrected it manually without knowing why it was wrong, which means he probably saved Hale's life a second time without realizing it. A pause. But Dara, the morning shift started 40 minutes ago. Whoever modified those orders may try again. She was already standing, already reaching for her coat. I'm going in, she said. You don't have credentials for the ICU. I have enough, she said, and she was already moving toward the door when the sound came from the stairwell outside her apartment. Not loud, not alarming, just a careful footstep on the 3rd stair, the one that always creaked, the one that she'd memorized in her first week here because old habits from a different life don't fully die. She stopped with her hand on the doorknob. Someone was standing just outside her door, and they hadn't knocked. She didn't open the door. She stepped back from it, 1 step, 2, silent on the hardwood in her socks, and scanned the apartment the way she hadn't needed to scan a space in 2 years. Exit points, front door, compromised. Kitchen window, fire escape, viable. Bedroom window, 2-story drop onto concrete, last resort. She moved toward the kitchen, keeping her weight forward, keeping the noise of it below the threshold of the old building's ambient creaks. The footstep outside didn't repeat. Whoever was out there was standing still now, which was in some ways worse. She had her phone in her hand. She typed a single line to Wick's number. Someone outside my door. Not knocking. Then she set the phone face down on the counter where the screen wouldn't be visible from the door gap, picked up the cast iron skillet from the stove, not because she had any particular plan for it, but because her hands needed something weighted in them. And waited. 3 seconds. 5. A knock. 2 raps, unhurried, almost polite. She didn't answer. Ms. Moss. A woman's voice, low, accented slightly, somewhere upper Midwest, Minnesota maybe, with the vowels slightly flattened. My name is Dr. Petra Vanek. I'm the incoming chief of medicine for Harlow Creek Regional. I was notified about your situation last night, and I drove up from Billings this morning. A pause. I'm alone. I'm not recording. I'd like to talk to you before the hearing tomorrow. Dara stood in her kitchen for another 4 seconds. Then she crossed to the door and looked through the peephole. A woman, 60s, gray hair cut short and practical, in a wool coat that was good quality but not ostentatious. She was holding a briefcase at her side with the specific posture of someone who'd learned that briefcases made people nervous and was trying to make it look non-threatening. She was alone. The stairwell behind her was empty. Dara opened the door but not the chain. Show me hospital ID. Vanek produced it without comment. A Harlow Creek Regional Administrative Credential, photo matching, issued 6 weeks ago. Incoming appointments were often credentialed before their start date. Dara opened the chain. Vanek came in, looked around the apartment with the same assessing quality that Oren had, but with less agenda in it, and sat in the chair Dara indicated near the window. She put the briefcase on the floor and didn't open it. "I need to understand something before we start," Dara said. "Who told you about my situation?" "Greta Fenn. Last night, after she spoke to you." Vanek folded her hands in her lap. "She's been documenting things for 3 months, Miss Moss. Not formally. She doesn't have the protection for a formal process yet, but she's been keeping records." She looked at Dara steadily. "Reeves Talcott has done this before." The apartment went quiet in a way that had weight. "The 2 incidents he cited in the amendment," Dara said, "the ones I have no record of. He fabricated similar documentation at Sutter Basin before he left. 2 nurses. One resigned before the hearing, one lost her license on a board referral." Vanek said it with the flat anger of someone who'd had time to be furious and had metabolized it into something useful. Neither incident was real. Both women had challenged his clinical decisions. One had caught a medication error that he signed off on. Dara thought about the pharmacy logs, about the modified drip rates in room 14, about a credential belonging to a nurse on leave that had been used to access the system. "This isn't just about me," she said. "No. He's been doing this systematically, removing people who see things he doesn't want seen." She paused. "And the board referral is the mechanism, because even a cleared referral takes long enough to damage a career and most people can't afford to wait it out." Vanek nodded once. "I was brought in because the hospital board has been concerned about Talcott's tenure for some time. Not enough to act, not until now. I'm here, officially, to conduct an operational review of the surgery department." She looked at Dara directly. "And unofficially, I'm here because Greta Fenn told me that whatever is happening in that building right now is larger than a personnel dispute, and she didn't know who else to call." Dara's phone vibrated on the counter. She checked it. Wick, responding to her earlier message. "Clear. Was one of ours. Sorry. Posted without notifying you. Sloppy." Then 3 seconds later, "Medication situation in room 14 escalating. Need you at the hospital. Sending credentials now." She looked at Vanek. "I have to go." "I know." Vanek stood without protest. "The hearing is 9 a.m. tomorrow. If you have documentation, anything that establishes your clinical call was correct before the surgery, bring it, all of it, time-stamped, sourced, and in order." She picked up her briefcase. "I'll be in that room. I'm not there as your advocate. I'm there as a board observer, but I can ask questions that you might not be able to ask yourself." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that require Talcott to explain why the amendment to his incident report was filed 11 minutes after someone used a dead contractor ID to access a federal patient's medical records." Vanek said it quietly, precisely, and moved toward the door. "Whoever he's connected to, whatever this is beyond the hospital, those 2 events happening in the same 11-minute window is either a coincidence so remarkable it defies statistical plausibility, or it is the evidence that destroys him." She left. Dara had her coat on 20 seconds later. Harlow Creek Regional in the middle of the morning had the specific organized energy of a hospital that was running slightly over capacity. The lobbies too full, the elevators too slow, the hallways showing the friction of a system doing its best under conditions that were about 3 staff members short of manageable. Dara moved through it using the side entrance credential Wick had sent to her phone, bypassing the main desk where her face would register with people who'd seen the suspension memo. She took the stairs to the ICU. Troy Bast had been replaced by the day nurse, a woman named Addison Clare who was technically competent and thorough in a way that made her reliable, but not especially quick at pattern recognition. Dara had worked 2 shifts alongside her and knew that Addison would follow a physician's order without the particular skepticism that came from having seen orders weaponized, which meant whoever had modified those medication entries was likely counting on the day shift. Dara checked the medication administration record at the nursing station using a supervisor-level access code that Wick had included with the credentials. A code that should not have existed, technically, but the federal apparatus apparently had ways of generating things that should not have existed. She compared the current orders against what she'd discussed with Wick the night before. 2 entries had been changed back. That was Wick's people, correcting the modifications once they'd been identified. But there was a third entry that hadn't been flagged, a seemingly routine order for a post-surgical anticoagulant at a dosage that was, in isolation, completely within normal parameters, for a patient who'd lost the blood volume Marcus Hale had lost, and whose splenic repair was less than 24 hours old. That dosage was not within normal parameters. It was, in fact, precisely calibrated to cause a rebleed that would appear as a spontaneous surgical complication. She cross-referenced the ordering physician. The name was Dr. Una Park, the anesthesiologist who'd been in the OR. But the timestamp on the order was 7:14 a.m., and Dara knew from the hospital schedule she'd memorized that Park's shift didn't start until 8. Someone had ordered under Park's credentials while Park was still at home. She pulled out her phone and took a photograph of the screen. Then she went to room 14. Marcus Hale was awake and looked worse than he had at midnight, which was consistent with his stated plan to make himself clinically immovable but still uncomfortable to witness. He was gray-pale, his pressure low normal, his temperature reading 37.9. Not a true fever yet, but trending. "There's a fraudulent anticoagulant order on your chart," Dara said, pulling the door closed behind her. "Filed under Park's credentials at 7:14 a.m. I'm going to have it pulled, but I need you to know it's there because whoever placed it may get an alert when the order is canceled." "How long ago was it placed?" 2 hours. "Addison Clare hasn't administered it yet. It's scheduled for noon." He processed that in the fast, economical way of someone who'd been processing dangerous information for years. "Cancel it and let them know it's been noticed? Or cancel it quietly and see who comes to check on the order?" "Option 2, he said immediately. "Option 2 tells us where they're positioned. Option 2 also means I need to be in this room or close to it for the next 4 hours. Can you do that?" "I'm working on it." She looked at his chart. "The anticoagulant, are you symptomatic? Any abdominal pain, distension?" "Some." He said it carefully. "Left side. Started about an hour ago." She put her hand on his abdomen, palpated gently. The tension there was new since midnight. Not dramatic, not yet, but present. The splenic repair was stressed. Whether that was from his deliberate self-management or from some earlier, smaller medication manipulation she hadn't caught yet, she couldn't be certain. "I need to call Park," she said. "The real Park. She needs to know her credentials have been used." "Wick. Wick's running the federal side. I need the clinical side handled by someone with actual authority in this building, and right now that's Park." She paused. "Unless you have an objection." "No." He looked at the ceiling. "Do what you need to do." She called Park from the hallway. Park answered on the second ring, already at the hospital. She'd come in early. Her voice had the slightly sharp quality of someone who'd heard something unsettling before their coffee had finished. "I know," Park said before Dara finished explaining. "I got a notification on my prescriber account 20 minutes ago about an order I didn't place. I've been trying to reach pharmacy." A pause. Who are you exactly?" "You're the nurse Talcott suspended." "Yes." "And you're calling me from inside my patient's room." "Your patient would be dead by afternoon if I weren't." Dara said it without heat. "The order needs to be canceled through official channels. It needs to come from you, with a note indicating fraudulent credential use. That creates a paper trail that can't be dismissed." A silence. "Why would someone want this particular patient dead?" Park asked. It wasn't a naive question. It was the question of someone trying to calibrate how far outside the boundaries of their normal working life they'd stepped. "That's a longer answer than we have time for right now." "Will you tell me later?" "If I can. Yes." Park was quiet for another 2 seconds. "Canceling the order now. I'm also notifying the pharmacy supervisor and documenting the credential anomaly." A pause. "Dara, if Talcott finds out you're in this building, I know. Is there anything else you need from me?" "Get to the hospital and stay visible. Don't go anywhere alone." Dara said it and heard herself saying it and understood, as she did, that whatever had started as a personnel dispute about an ultrasound machine had become something considerably more dangerous than that. "And if anyone asks you to modify an order verbally without written documentation, refuse. Document the refusal. Timestamp everything." "Understood." Park's voice had settled into a register that was careful and clear, and slightly frightened in a way that she was managing professionally. Good luck. Dara ended the call and stood in the corridor outside room 14 for a moment, letting the morning organize itself in her mind. The canceled order would generate a system notification. Someone monitoring Hale's chart, and someone had to be, because the modifications were too targeted and too timely to be coming from outside the system, would see that notification within minutes. She needed to be somewhere she could watch who reacted. She went to the nursing station, positioned herself at the secondary terminal with a clear sight line down both corridor branches, and pulled up the monitoring interface using the supervisor access. To anyone walking past, she was a staff member reviewing charts. She had done this for 40 minutes and was beginning to wonder if she'd miscalculated the timing when she saw him. Not Talcott. That was the first surprise. The man who came off the elevator and walked toward the ICU nursing station with the deliberate, unhurried movement of someone who belonged there was a face she half recognized. One of the rotating clinical coordinators who managed bed assignments and interdepartment logistics. His name badge read Dorlin Fess. Clinical coordination. She'd seen him twice in 2 years, both times briefly, the kind of peripheral figure in a large institution that you registered without retaining. He stopped at the nursing station 2 feet from her and pulled up a terminal. His keystrokes had the practiced quality of someone who'd been navigating this system for a long time. His eyes moved to room 14's status, saw the order cancellation, and he went very still in a way that was small and fast and completely controlled. The kind of stillness that is itself a tell, because it's what the body does when it's suppressing a reaction. He pulled out his phone, held it below the counter, and typed something. Dara photographed it. She photographed his badge. She photographed the terminal screen over his shoulder with the timestamp visible. He walked back to the elevator without looking at her. She texted everything to Wick immediately, then followed at a distance that kept her in visual range of the elevator bank. He went down. She tracked the indicator. Basement level. Loading dock access. Supply corridors. The back architecture of the building that nobody visited unless they worked it. She took the stairs. She came out in the supply corridor 20 seconds after the elevator would have arrived. The corridor was long, fluorescent, smelling of industrial cleaner and cardboard. She could hear footsteps ahead, unhurried still, but she could also hear a voice, male, low, speaking in the compressed, quick cadence of someone giving instructions. She moved closer, staying against the left wall where the shelving units created shadow. Order's been flagged. Someone canceled it with a credential note. It's too clean. This isn't clinical. Someone's been watching the chart. A pause while the other party spoke. No, I can't do another modification. They've got eyes on the pharmacy access now. Another pause. Then we moved to the secondary, like we discussed. A final pause, and the voice shifted slightly. Lower, harder. He doesn't leave that room alive. That's what we were paid for. Dara had her phone recording and had stopped breathing. The footsteps began moving again. Toward her, she realized a half-second too late. She ducked behind a shelving unit loaded with IV supply boxes as Fess came around the corner, phone to his ear, eyes still down. He passed within 4 feet of her. She held completely still. He kept walking, pushed through the fire door at the end of the corridor, and was gone. She let out a slow breath and sent the audio file to Wick before she'd even stood up fully. His response came in 40 seconds. Don't move, don't approach him. We're pulling resources now. Then, 10 seconds later. Where are you exactly? She typed the corridor number from the sign above the fire door. His response, stay there. 2 minutes. It was actually 4 minutes, during which she stood in a supply corridor and listened to the building breathe around her and understood with a clarity that wasn't pleasant, that the man she'd just recorded had stated the intention to kill a federal operative inside a hospital where Dara Moss was currently operating without official authorization using access credentials that technically didn't exist. The 2 agents who came through the fire door were not Wick or Oren. They were younger, harder looking, wearing civilian clothes that fit the way civilian clothes fit people who spent most of their time in very different attire. They had earpieces. They moved past her without speaking, following the corridor. Wick came through 40 seconds later. Fess, she said before he could speak. We know. We've had a flag on him for 18 hours. We just didn't have enough to move. He looked at her with an expression that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite frustration and was probably both. The audio you sent constitutes sufficient probable cause for a federal warrant. He's not leaving this building. A pause. You recorded a man in a federal investigation without knowing you were a designated asset. Was I recording a man, or was I recording evidence of a murder plot? He almost smiled. Both. Then we should probably focus on the murder plot. Agreed. He sobered. There's a complication. The secondary, that whatever Fess meant by it, we don't know what that is yet. It's not another medication modification, or they'd have said medication. It's something else in the building. Equipment, Dara said immediately. Something that can be made to fail without looking like it was made to fail. She thought through it fast. Ventilator, infusion pump, O2 line. All of those have failure modes that present as equipment malfunction rather than tampering. She paused. He's not on a ventilator, but the infusion pump is running pressors. If the pump is modified, we're pulling the room 14 equipment now for inspection, Wick said, already on his radio. That's going to be visible. Fess will know we're on to the secondary. Fess is already being detained, he said, but whoever he was reporting to on that call isn't. He looked at her. The voice he was talking to, did it match anyone you know? She'd been trying to place it since the corridor. The call quality had been too compressed, too filtered. She couldn't give him a name. She shook her head. Okay. He looked down the corridor. The hearing is tomorrow at 9. We're not going to have Talcott's full connection to this documented by then. I don't need his full connection documented by then, Dara said. I need the hearing to run. I told you. I know what you told me, but there's new information. He met her eyes. Fenn submitted the original and amended incident report to the board this morning, like you asked. The board's legal counsel reviewed it and found the amendment procedurally irregular. A pause. Talcott knows. Fenn told us he was in her office for 20 minutes an hour ago. She said he was calm, which she described as the most frightening version of him she'd encountered. Dara absorbed that. He's going to try to pull the hearing, she said. He's going to try to reframe it. His legal counsel filed a motion this morning to have your clinical assessment formally excluded from the record on the grounds that you acted outside your authorized scope of practice. Wick's jaw tightened slightly. If the motion is granted, the only thing in front of the committee tomorrow is the conduct charge, your behavior in the trauma bay, not whether you were right. Can they grant it? The committee chair has discretion. A pause. His name is Dr. Werner Kast. He's been on staff at Harlow Creek for 14 years. He and Talcott have co-authored 3 papers. The corridor was cold and smelled like cleaning solution, and the fluorescent lights buzzed with a frequency that was right at the edge of noticeable. Vanek, Dara said. Dr. Vanek is attending as a board observer. Does she have authority to challenge the motion? She has authority to raise a procedural objection. That's not the same as overriding it. Wick ran a hand over the back of his neck. This is the part where I tell you we can make things disappear from that hearing record if necessary. Make things appear, move timelines. Don't. She said it flat and fast. Whatever you can do with federal resources, don't use it to manipulate that hearing. If we do this that way, Talcott's lawyers spend the next 3 years arguing contaminated process, and he walks on everything. She looked at Wick steadily. We do this clean, or we don't do it at all. That might mean the motion gets granted and the clinical record gets excluded. Then I walk into that room and I defend my conduct without the clinical record. She said it and meant it and felt the full weight of what it would cost if she was wrong. The ultrasound image is time-stamped. I have my own contemporaneous notes. I have Bev Tolliver's documentation of the amendment. I have Park's credential anomaly report. She paused. And if Vanek asks Talcott in that room why his amendment was filed in the same 11-minute window as a fraudulent access request on a federal patient's chart, that question goes into the record regardless of what the motion says. Wick looked at her for a long moment. You understand what happens if Talcott figures out before tomorrow morning that you have all of this? Yes. He's calm right now because he thinks he's still managing this situation. If he realizes the situation is past managing, he'll either run or he'll try to accelerate the secondary, she said, which is why Fess matters. If Fess is talking to someone above Talcott in this network, and you have Fess, we're working on it. Wick's radio crackled. He listened for 2 seconds and then looked at her with an expression that changed the temperature of the corridor. They found the secondary. What is it? O2 line to room 14. Someone accessed the medical gas panel in the basement and installed a bleed valve on the oxygen supply. It's a slow leak, calibrated to reduce oxygen concentration over 6 to 8 hours. By tonight, Hale would be hypoxic, and the readout on his bedside monitor would show normal because the valve is upstream of the sensor. He stopped. If we hadn't been looking, we wouldn't have found it. She stood with that. Who had access to the medical gas panel? She asked. Maintenance logs show one authorized access in the last 48 hours. Wick's voice was flat. Dr. Reeves Talcott logged in at 6:48 this morning under a maintenance inspection code. A pause. He was in that basement 45 minutes before the fraudulent medication order appeared under Park's credentials. The hearing, the suspension, the amendment, the contractor access, the pharmacy modifications, the O2 valve, Fess on the phone. The architecture of it assembled itself in Dara's mind with the cold precision of a thing that has been planned over a long time and executed methodically, and might have worked completely if a trauma nurse with a portable ultrasound machine hadn't been paying attention to a man's abdomen on a Tuesday morning. Arrest him, she said. We can't yet. The maintenance log is circumstantial. It shows access, not intent. The O2 valve has no fingerprints. It was handled with gloves. Fess can give us the chain of command above him, but Fess hasn't talked yet and may not. Wick's expression was the frustrated precision of someone who had everything he needed and none of it in a form that would survive a federal courtroom. If we move on Talcott tonight and it doesn't stick, he walks, and everything, the network, the connection to the crash, all of it, goes dark. We only get one move. Then the hearing is the move, Dara said. That's a hospital committee hearing, not a federal proceeding. The hearing is on record. Whatever comes out in that room is documented by the hospital's own administrative process. If Vanek asks the right questions and Talcott answers them, even partially, even defensively, those answers become part of a record that you can use in federal proceedings. She looked at him. And if Talcott tries to shut down the hearing, or doesn't show up, or invokes counsel, that's also on record. Either way, the committee sees that his response to being questioned is not the response of someone who has nothing to hide. Wick was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the building moved, its ordinary sounds, carts, doors, distant voices, the percussion of a hospital's working day, continuing without awareness of what was happening in this basement corridor. The hearing is 9 a.m., he said finally. I know. Talcott will have legal counsel in that room. I know that too. He looked at her with something she couldn't fully categorize. Not admiration, not exactly, but something adjacent to the recognition of a particular quality in a person. You need to go home and get some sleep, he said. I need to make sure Hale is stable and the room equipment has been replaced first. We have people. I know you have people. I'm going anyway. She moved toward the stairs. Send me the complete medication log for the last 48 hours. All orders, all modifications, every access timestamp. I want to walk into that room tomorrow with the full picture. She was on the second stair when Wick said her name. She stopped. The woman who lost her license at Sutter Basin, he said. The one Talcott did this to before. Her name is Renata Voss. She's been working as a home health aide for 3 years because her board referral was never formally resolved. The investigation stalled and nobody followed up. He paused. She has documentation. She kept everything. We contacted her this morning. Dara gripped the stair rail. Will she testify? She asked. She's already on a flight to Montana, he said. The stairwell door closed behind her and she climbed toward the ICU in the building's ordinary noise and thought about a woman on a plane with 3 years of documents in her carry-on, flying toward a hearing that could undo what had been done to her. And she pushed that thought down into a place where it would give her energy rather than emotion, because she needed the energy tomorrow, and she could not afford the emotion tonight. She was 20 feet from room 14 when she turned the corner and stopped. The door to room 14 was open. It had been closed when she left. She had checked it herself. Addison Clare was not at the nursing station. The station was empty, which it should not have been, not during a shift change, not with an ICU patient flagged for monitoring. Dara moved to the door. The room was dim, the afternoon light low, the monitors running. Hale was in the bed, eyes closed, chest rising. Beside the bed, in the chair she'd pulled up herself the night before, sat a man she had never seen. He was perhaps 55, in clothes that looked expensive in a way that wasn't flashy. A dark jacket, a good watch, the overall presentation of someone who had money, and had made the deliberate decision to look like he was trying not to show it. He had a tablet on his knee and he was looking at Hale's monitors with the unhurried attention of someone who had been here for a while and had no intention of being interrupted. He didn't look up when she stepped into the room. "Nurse Moss," he said. He knew her name, said it with the casual certainty of a man reading from a file. "Sit down. We should talk before tomorrow morning, and I'd prefer we do it here, where I can be reasonably sure we're not being recorded." She stayed standing. "I don't know who you are," she said. He looked up then, and his eyes were the color of shallow water over rock, pale, flat, and completely without warmth. "No," he said. "You don't. And that's the only advantage I have left." He glanced at the monitors, then back at her. "I'd like to discuss what happens to your license, your suspension, and Mr. Hale's ongoing health if the committee hearing tomorrow doesn't go the way certain parties are hoping it will." Hale's eyes opened. He'd been awake the whole time. Hale's eyes were open and tracking, and he said nothing, which was itself a form of communication. The deliberate stillness of a man who had assessed the situation and decided that the most useful thing he could do was watch. Dara stayed in the doorway. The man in the chair had the particular comfort of someone who didn't feel threatened, and that comfort was its own kind of threat. He held the tablet loosely, hadn't moved since she'd entered, and his eyes were patient in the way that certain kinds of dangerous people's eyes were patient. Not calm, exactly, but calibrated. As if he'd run this conversation already in his head and was simply waiting for the participants to catch up. "I'm going to need a name," Dara said. "That's not how this works." "Then we don't have anything to talk about." He looked at her with something that might have been mild interest. "You're better at this than Reeves said you were. He described you as stubborn. I'd call it something more functional." He set the tablet on his knee, face down. "My name is Garrett Lund. I run a private consulting group that has had a working relationship with this hospital and several others for the past 6 years. I'm not here to threaten you, Miss Moss. I'm here to offer you a resolution." "What kind of resolution?" "The suspension disappears. The board referral is withdrawn. Your record is cleared completely. Not just the Harlow Creek file, but the discharge paperwork from your military service that you've been hoping nobody looks at too closely." He said that last part the way people say things when they want you to know they've done their homework. "You go back to work. This patient," a brief nod toward Hale, "is transferred to a federal facility, which is where he should have been from the start, and whatever investigation your new federal friends are running proceeds without the involvement of anyone currently employed by Harlow Creek Regional." He paused. "In return, the documentation you've been compiling, the timestamp records, the incident report amendment, the pharmacy logs, disappears. The hearing tomorrow is postponed indefinitely, and you stop." The monitors beeped. Somewhere down the hall, a cart moved. "You're asking me to walk away from evidence of a murder attempt on a federal operative," she said. "I'm asking you to recognize that the situation is more complicated than it looks from where you're standing." Lund's voice was still unhurried. "The people involved in Mr. Hale's situation are not the kind of people who lose gracefully. If the hearing happens, if the investigation widens, the individuals who arranged the crash and who arranged the contingencies in this hospital will implement other measures, not against you specifically." A pause. "Against people connected to you." Dara went very still. "There it is," Hale said from the bed. His voice was rough but clear. It was the first thing he'd said, and it re-centered the room. "That's the actual offer." Lund glanced at him. "You should be resting." "I've been listening to you for 20 minutes. I'm done resting." Hale pushed himself up against the pillow. It cost him. His jaw tightened, but he did it. "You're not here to negotiate. You're here to assess how much we know, because if you were here to negotiate, you'd have come with something real. That offer is nothing. A cleared suspension, some paperwork. That's table noise. That's you trying to find out if we're far enough along that it's worth actually dealing, or whether you can still scare us into stopping." Lund looked at Hale for a long moment. "You're not as impaired as your chart suggests," he said. "Lucky for me." Hale's eyes didn't move from him. "Dorlin Fess is in federal custody. You know that. The O2 valve is in an evidence bag. You know that too. The question you came here to answer is whether you can still cut this off at Talcott or whether it's already moved above him." He paused to breathe, deliberate, measured. "It's already moved above him. That's why you're here in person." Something shifted in Lund's expression. Tiny, controlled, but real. The first crack in the calibration. Dara watched it happen. "I need you to leave this room," she said. "Right now." Lund stood slowly, without urgency, and tucked the tablet under his arm. He looked at Dara with the expression of someone filing information away. "The offer expires at midnight," he said. "It expired when you walked in," she said. He left. His footsteps were unhurried all the way to the elevator, and Dara stood at the room door watching until the elevator closed, and then she took out her phone and called Wick. "Garrett Lund," she said before he could speak. He was just in room 14. He presented himself as a consultant with a working relationship with the hospital. "Manmad an offer. Documentation disappears. Hearing postponed. Hale transferred. In return, we stop." A silence that had volume to it. "Lund," Wick said. Then, "How long ago did he leave?" 90 seconds. "He's going to be gone before we can get anyone to the exits." Not quite a curse, but close. "Dara, Garrett Lund is not a consultant. He's the reason we've been running this investigation for 8 weeks. He runs an asset placement network. The hospitals, Sutter Basin, the others in the database. They're not coincidences, they're infrastructure. He places personnel in civilian medical facilities with access to patient records, medication systems, medical gas panels. The network's primary function is making people die in ways that look like clinical failures." Wick's voice had the compressed urgency of someone working very hard to stay controlled. "We have been trying to get close to Lund for 14 months. He does not make personal appearances." "He was scared enough to come himself," Dara said. "He was scared enough to come himself," Wick repeated, "which means we're closer than we realized." A pause. "Did he touch anything in that room?" "The chair arm, the door handle on the way out." "We're sending a team for prints. Don't let anyone clean that room." A pause. "Dara, the offer he made, the thing about people connected to you. Do you have family in the area?" She didn't answer right away. "A sister," she said. "In Billings. She doesn't know anything about any of this. I'm putting a protective detail on her in the next 30 minutes. Don't call her yet. If she acts differently, it signals that you took the threat seriously and the threat gets escalated." He stopped. "You did the right thing turning him down." "I know I did," she said. "Make sure it stays the right thing." She hung up and looked at Hale. "You knew he was there," she said. "Before I came in. Woke up when he sat down. Spent 10 minutes deciding whether to call out or wait." He settled back against the pillow with the careful movement of someone managing pain. "I wanted to hear what he'd offer. And now I know they're running out of road." He looked at her. "He came because they can't stop the hearing through official channels anymore. The legal motion to exclude your clinical record. It was filed because they thought it would work. It didn't work because Vanek blocked it." Dara went still. "When?" 40 minutes ago, apparently. I overheard the night nurse telling someone on the phone." A faint ghost of something crossed his face. Not a smile exactly, but adjacent. "The board's legal counsel found that excluding contemporaneous clinical documentation from a conduct hearing violated the hospital's own procedural charter. Vanek cited the specific charter section. Talcott's motion was denied. The hearing was intact. The clinical record was in." Dara sat down in the chair that Lund had just vacated and let herself feel it for approximately 4 seconds. The specific relief of a mechanism working the way it was supposed to. And then she put it away. "Get some sleep," she said. "Real sleep." "Pot," he said. "Kettle." She went home at 6 p.m. and did something she almost never did. She called her sister. Not to tell her about the protective detail or about Lund's threat, just to talk. Her sister's name was Fiona, and she was 3 years younger and worked as a veterinary technician and had never asked Dara why she'd come home from her 3rd deployment quieter and hollower than she'd left, which was one of the reasons Dara had moved to Harlow Creek instead of staying in Billings. Distance as protection. She told herself it was for Fiona's sake. Fiona answered on the 2nd ring and talked for 20 minutes about a border collie with a cruciate ligament problem and a difficult client and a coworker who kept stealing her parking spot, and Dara sat on her kitchen floor again with her back against the cabinets and listened to every word of it with a concentration that had nothing to do with border collies and everything to do with the sound of her sister's ordinary life continuing. "You okay?" Fiona asked, eventually, in the way she asked it, not pressuring, just leaving the door open. "I have a work thing tomorrow," Dara said. "It's going to be fine." "You always say that." "It's usually accurate." Fiona laughed, short and warm. "Call me after?" "Yeah," Dara said. "I will." She ate something, reviewed her documentation for 2 hours, and slept 5 hours without dreaming. The committee hearing room at Harlow Creek Regional was on the 3rd floor of the administrative wing, a room that had been designed to feel neutral and had instead achieved the particular atmosphere of a space where uncomfortable things happened on a regular basis. Beige walls, a long table, chairs arranged in the specific configuration that communicates that some people in this room have power and others are being evaluated. The board committee sat along one side, 5 members, including Dr. Werner Kast at the center, with the slightly compressed expression of a man who had not expected his Tuesday to become complicated. Vanek sat at the far end of the observer row with a legal pad and a pen, and the posture of someone who intended to use both. Talcott arrived 4 minutes before 9 with his legal counsel, a man named Bryce Aldrin, who had the groomed, careful look of someone who billed by the quarter hour and was very good at procedural obstruction. Talcott himself was in a dark suit, which was unusual for a hospital setting and was itself a signal about how he'd framed this in his own mind. He looked at Dara when he entered and then looked away with the specific deliberateness of a man who wanted the room to see him not looking. Dara had her documentation in a folder, her notes, the time-stamped ultrasound record, Bev Tolliver's written account of the original and amended incident report, Dr. Park's signed statement about the credential anomaly. She had organized it the night before with the same method she'd used preparing field reports, chronological, sourced, every claim attached to evidence. She had not slept enough, and her coffee that morning had been bad, and her left knee was doing the thing it had been doing since Kandahar, which was aching in the cold for reasons that had more to do with scar tissue than weather. None of that showed on her face. Kast opened the hearing at 9:03. He outlined the procedural framework, noted that the purpose was to review the conduct allegation against Dara Moss and the associated suspension recommendation, and noted the presence of Dr. Vanek as a board observer. His tone was the measured neutrality of a man who was aware of the weight of the room and was not entirely comfortable with it. Talcott's account came first. Aldrin guided it with skilled efficiency, the authorized scope of nursing practice, the chain of command in a trauma bay, the disruption caused by an unsanctioned diagnostic intervention. Talcott spoke well. He was credible. He had 23 years of institutional authority behind every sentence, and he deployed it with the confidence of a man who had not yet understood that the ground beneath him had changed. He reached the amendment's assertion of prior conduct incidents. "Dr. Talcott," Vanek's voice cut in, even and clear. "The committee has before it 2 versions of your incident report. The original, filed at 11:15 a.m. on the day of the incident, and an amendment filed at 1:30 p.m. the same day. Could you describe the circumstances that led you to amend the report?" Aldrin moved to object on procedural grounds. Kast, to his credit, overruled it. Talcott looked at Vanek with the expression of a man recalculating. "New information came to my attention after the initial filing." "What information?" "Regarding Ms. Moss's prior conduct history. Could you identify the source of that information and the documentation that corroborates the 2 specific incidents described in the amendment?" A pause that lasted 2 seconds too long. "It came from conversations with colleagues." "Which colleagues?" "I'd need to review my records." "The committee would appreciate that review," Vanek said, in a tone that suggested she did not expect it to produce anything. "I'd also note for the record that a review of Ms. Moss's personnel file, conducted by the Nursing Administration yesterday, found no documentation of either incident described in the amendment." Aldrin objected. Kast overruled again, and this time the expression on his face had shifted slightly. The committee chair who had co-authored papers with Talcott was looking at his co-author with a new and uncomfortable attentiveness. Dara presented her documentation methodically. The ultrasound image time-stamped 6:31 a.m., 19 minutes before the patient went to the OR, 28 minutes before the surgical team identified the abdominal hemorrhage. Her written assessment notes, time-stamped concurrently. The patient's intraoperative blood pressure record, which showed a systolic nadir of 31, the signature of a hemorrhage that had been progressing unchecked since admission. The patient's blood pressure was 31 systolic on the table, she said directly to the committee. That number represents the endpoint of a hemorrhagic process that was visible on ultrasound before surgery began. I identified it. I reported it. The report was dismissed. She paused. The patient is alive. The mechanism that saved his life was the abdominal exploration that my assessment indicated was necessary. I am not claiming credit for the surgery. I am stating that the clinical call was correct, was made before the surgery, and was documented. The room was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when something has been said that can't be unsaid. Aldrin attempted a reframe: unauthorized scope of practice, institutional hierarchy, the importance of chain of command in clinical environments. He was technically proficient, but the time-stamped ultrasound image was in front of every committee member, and the gap between Dara's assessment and the surgical finding was not a matter of interpretation. Then Bev Tolliver walked in. She hadn't been announced. She came through the door at 9:47 with a printed document in her hand, and the look of a woman who had made a decision and was not second-guessing it. "I apologize for the interruption," she said to Cast, who looked startled. "My name is Beverly Tolliver, charge nurse. 11 years at this facility. I have submitted a formal written statement to the committee, but I also need to say on record that I have reviewed Miss Moss's personnel file personally, and the incidents described in Dr. Talcott's amended report do not exist in that file and did not occur during my tenure on this ward." She put the document on the table in front of Cast. "I'm also making a formal report that the amendment to the incident report was filed at 1:30 p.m., which is 11 minutes after an unauthorized access attempt on a federal patient's medical records was logged in this facility's administrative system. I don't believe those two things are unrelated." The room erupted. Aldrin was on his feet. Talcott's composure cracked. Not dramatically, not in any way that was obvious to someone who didn't know what to look for, but Dara was watching him and she saw it, the jaw tightening, the slight forward lean, the hands pressing flat on the table in front of him. The body of a man whose story was coming apart while he was still trying to hold it together. Cass called order, got it, and looked at Talcott with an expression that had completed its journey from discomfort to something harder. "Dr. Talcott," he said, "the committee would like to understand your movements on the morning of October 14th, specifically between the hours of 6:30 and 7:30 a.m. Aldrin put his hand on Talcott's arm, a quiet, urgent gesture. Talcott looked at it, looked at Cast, and said, "On the advice of counsel, I'm not going to answer questions beyond the scope of this proceeding." The silence that followed that answer was the loudest thing that had happened in the room all morning. Vanek wrote something on her legal pad. Cast looked at Aldrin. "This proceeding has a defined scope. It's been the committee's view that the scope included the incident report and the suspension recommendation. Are you indicating that Dr. Talcott will not answer questions related to his conduct on the date in question?" "Related to matters outside the specific conduct allegation," Aldrin said carefully. "The amendment to the incident report is directly relevant to the conduct allegation," Vanek said, without looking up from her notes, "as is the integrity of the documentation submitted to this committee. If Dr. Talcott declines to address questions about that documentation, the committee may draw its own conclusions about that declination." Aldrin knew what that meant. He leaned close to Talcott and spoke in a voice too low to carry across the table, and whatever he said made Talcott's expression close down completely, the professional mask snapping back into place over whatever was happening underneath it. "The committee may draw whatever conclusions it deems appropriate," Aldrin said aloud. "We maintain that this proceeding was improperly framed from the outset and reserve all rights to challenge its findings." Cass nodded slowly. He looked at the documents in front of him. He looked at Dara. He looked at Talcott. "The committee will take a brief recess," he said. The recess lasted 31 minutes. Dara stood in the hallway with Bev, who looked exhausted and certain, which was how Dara felt too. The specific combination of someone who's done the right thing and knows it, and also understands that doing the right thing does not guarantee anything. "Renata Voss is in the building," Bev said quietly. "I saw her in the lobby with one of the federal people. She looks—" Bev stopped. "She looks like someone who's been carrying something heavy for a long time and is about to put it down." Dara looked at the closed hearing room door. "Did you know about Sutter Basin?" she asked. "Not the details. There were rumors when Talcott came here. Nobody wanted to look at them directly." Bev's jaw tightened. "I should have looked." You're looking now. 3 years too late for that woman. Dara didn't offer reassurance because there was no reassurance available that was honest. 3 years was 3 years, and nothing that happened in that hearing room was going to return them. The committee came back. Cass's face had the settled gravity of a decision made. This committee finds the suspension of Dara Moss to be unsupported by the clinical evidence presented, he said. The conduct allegation is dismissed. The suspension is vacated effective immediately, and the suspension notation will be removed from Ms. Moss's personnel file. He looked at the documents in front of him. The committee additionally finds that the amended incident report submitted by Dr. Talcott contains material inconsistencies that the committee is obligated to refer to the hospital board for further review. He looked at Talcott directly. Dr. Talcott, pending that review, you are placed on administrative leave. Your surgical privileges at this facility are suspended pending the outcome of the board investigation. Talcott didn't move, didn't speak. His face was the controlled surface of a man who was running the numbers somewhere behind his eyes and arriving at conclusions that Dara suspected he'd been postponing for some time. Aldrin began drafting the formal objection before Cass had finished speaking. It didn't matter. The record was made. Dara walked out of the hearing room at 10:58 a.m. and sat on a bench in the hallway outside and put her hands on her knees and breathed for a moment. Just breathed, in and out, like the fundamental simple machinery of staying alive. Her phone rang at 11:04. Wick. Fess talked, he said. When? An hour ago. His lawyer apparently made him understand that the O2 valve made him an accessory to attempted murder of a federal officer, and at that point he became quite cooperative. Wick's voice was dry, but not quite flat. There was something moving underneath it. The network is larger than we'd confirmed. 6 hospitals over 4 years. Lund's operation placed people in clinical settings and used them to access patient records and, in specific cases, to create clinical failures for targeted individuals. Hale was the most recent target. 2 previous targets we're aware of. Both ruled accidental deaths at the time. He paused. Fess named Talcott as the hospital-side facilitator. Talcott granted contractor access, provided internal credentials, authorized maintenance access for the gas panel. He was, in Fess's words, the local operator. And Lund? Warrant is being drafted. He's on a watch list. He won't get far. A beat. Dara. There are 2 names Fess gave us above Lund. This goes somewhere that is going to take months to fully document, but it started here. She leaned her head back against the wall. The hallway smelled like hospitals always smell. Antiseptic, recycled air, the faint undercurrent of human distress that got into the walls eventually. Renata Voss, she said, her board referral was never resolved. We're working with the state board to initiate a formal review. Given that the underlying documentation was fabricated, and Fess's statement corroborates the fabrication pattern at Sutter Basin, the referral should be dismissed and her license restored. He paused. Should be and will be are different things. It'll take time. Make it take less. Doing what I can. What about Talcott? Federal investigators are at the hospital now. Given the administrative leave order from the committee, we have grounds to restrict his movement. He's not going home today. Wick said it with the measured satisfaction of someone who has waited a long time for a specific thing to happen. His lawyer is arguing that the committee's action is extrajudicial. He's technically right. It doesn't matter. We have the warrant. We had it finalized 30 minutes ago. Dara closed her eyes for 2 seconds. His surgical privileges are suspended, she said. How many cases was he scheduled for this week? 3 elective surgeries and 2 follow-up consultations. Someone needs to call those patients today, before they see anything in the news. Hospital administration is handling it. A pause. You're still thinking about the patients. It's a hospital, she said. Someone should be. She was still sitting on the bench when footsteps came down the hallway, and she opened her eyes to find Renata Voss standing in front of her. A woman in her mid-40s with the specific look of someone who'd been through something long and grinding and had come out the other side without the smoothness being ground away. She was holding a folder of documents against her chest, the way people hold things they've protected for a long time. You're Moss, Voss said. Yes. Voss looked at her for a moment. They told me what you did. The ultrasound, the hearing. She didn't offer a full sentence, just those elements, like she was assembling something. You would have done the same, Dara said. Voss's jaw tightened briefly. I tried, 3 years ago. It didn't go the same way. She looked down at the folder. But I kept everything because I just knew that eventually the pattern would show up somewhere else and someone would need what I had. She looked up. Was it useful? It will be, Dara said. In the federal proceeding, it'll be foundational. Voss nodded slowly. Something moved across her face that wasn't relief. Not exactly. It was more complicated than relief. The particular emotion of a wrong being corrected after long enough that the correction itself changes shape. I've been a home health aide, she said, for 3 years. I take blood pressures and I remind people to take their medications, and it's… She stopped. It's good work, but I was an OR nurse for 16 years before. I know. They're saying the board referral will be dismissed, Dara said. I don't know how long the paperwork takes, but it will be dismissed. Voss looked at her with those careful, tired eyes and said, Thank you. She said it simply, without dramatics, the way people say things they mean completely. Dara nodded. She didn't look away. It was 11:22 a.m. when her phone buzzed again. Not Wick this time, not any number she recognized. She looked at the screen. A text from a number that had been blocked on her contact list since she'd separated from service. A number she hadn't used or contacted or thought about in 2 years. Associated with a handler from her last deployment who told her, when she medically discharged, to lose the number and not look back. The text had 4 words. We need to talk. She stared at the 4 words for a long time. Renata Voss had already moved down the hallway, folder pressed to her chest, walking toward whatever came next for her. The hearing room door was closed. Somewhere in the building, federal investigators were sitting across from Reeves Talcott and his lawyer, and the machinery of consequence was running the way it was supposed to run, slowly and without mercy. All of that was happening, and Dara was sitting on a bench in a hospital corridor, looking at a text from a number she'd been told to lose 2 years ago. She didn't call it back. She typed, Who is this now? The response came in under a minute. Colonel Adrienne Marsh, different role than when you knew me. We can talk in person or not at all. Your choice. I'm in Harlow Creek. Dara looked at the name for a moment. Marsh had been her last deployment's commanding medical officer. The woman who'd signed Dara's discharge paperwork and told her, with the particular exhausted honesty of someone who'd had this conversation too many times, that the body keeps score and Dara's body had scored enough. They hadn't parted badly. They hadn't parted warmly either. They'd parted the way people part when the institution they both served has run its course between them and there's nothing left to say that the paperwork hasn't already said. She typed, Where? The diner 2 blocks from the hospital had the specific character of a place that had been feeding the same town for 30 years without particularly caring whether anyone found it charming. Vinyl booths worn shiny at the edges, coffee that was strong and served in mugs that had lived through a lot of washing, a lunch counter where 2 men in work jackets were eating soup without talking. Marsh was already in the corner booth when Dara arrived, in civilian clothes, with the look of a woman in her mid-50s who had not softened with age but had compacted, everything unnecessary stripped away, what remained very dense and very deliberate. She looked at Dara the way people look when they've been reviewing a file and are now comparing it to the real thing. You look better than your record suggests you should, Marsh said. Your record suggested I shouldn't be operating at all, Dara said, and sat down. Marsh poured her coffee from the carafe on the table without asking. The discharge was medically correct. The nerve damage from the 3rd deployment was real. I stand by it. I know you do. What do you want? Marsh put the carafe down. How much has Wick told you about the scope of the Lund network? 6 hospitals, 4 years. 2 confirmed deaths ruled accidental. Hale was the most recent target. Dara wrapped her hands around the mug. Fess named Talcott as the local operator and Lund above him, with 2 names above Lund still being documented. 3 names, Marsh said. As of this morning, 3. The 3rd came from Lund's own financial records, which a federal judge authorized access to at 8 a.m. She looked at her coffee. The network wasn't built to kill specific individuals, though it did that. It was built to manage information, medical records specifically. Certain individuals, operatives, contractors, witnesses in federal proceedings, carried information in their medical histories that was valuable to specific parties. The network gave those parties access to that information before it could be used in proceedings, and in cases where the individual represented an ongoing risk, the network provided termination services that looked like clinical failures. She said it with the flat precision of someone who has moved past the point where the language of what they're describing requires cushioning. Hale carried information about a procurement network operating across 3 defense contractors. In his head, not in any file. The crash was designed to get him to a facility Lund controlled so they could either access his treatment records for intelligence or eliminate him if access wasn't sufficient. They didn't know he'd be brought to Harlow Creek specifically, Dara said. They didn't need to. Lund had people at 4 facilities within the relevant geographic range. Harlow Creek was one. Whichever hospital received Hale, Lund had a mechanism. Marsh looked at her. You were not a variable in that calculation. I know. You became one. Dara drank her coffee. It was exactly as strong as it looked. Why are you here, Colonel? Marsh was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, more like someone giving a thing its proper weight before setting it down. The network placed personnel in civilian hospitals by targeting former military medical specialists who had transitioned to civilian practice. People with the skills to be useful and the established cover of a legitimate civilian career. She met Dara's eyes. We found 23 individuals across the 6 facilities who fit that profile. In most cases, they were used without their knowledge, their credentials accessed, their documentation copied, their access patterns exploited. In 2 cases, they were active participants. She paused. We also found that Lund's organization had been tracking former combat medics and SOF medical personnel in civilian roles for the past 5 years, mapping them, building a database of who they were and where they were and what access they had. A pause. Your file was in that database, Dara. Has been for 18 months. The diner moved around them. The 2 men at the counter finishing their soup, a waitress refilling water glasses, the ordinary rhythm of a town going about its Tuesday. They knew who I was when I came to Harlow Creek, Dara said. They knew before you came to Harlow Creek. We believe Talcott's placement at this facility, which happened 4 years ago, was partly informed by the database. He was positioned where the network had identified former military medical personnel who might notice things and needed to be managed. Marsh's jaw was tight. You weren't the first. The nurse before you, a woman named Patricia Delk, who left the hospital 18 months ago citing a hostile work environment. We believe she saw something she wasn't meant to see, and Talcott forced her out before she could document it. We're looking at her case now. Dara thought about that. About a woman she'd never met whose empty position she'd filled, whose departure she'd never questioned because hospitals had turnover and people left jobs. And she hadn't asked because she'd been trying very hard not to be the kind of person who asked questions that led to answers. What do you need from me? She said. Marsh put both hands flat on the table. The federal investigation is going to take months. The prosecution will take longer. The 2 names above Lund are connected to a procurement structure that has legal representation sophisticated enough to delay proceedings for years if we let them. She looked at Dara steadily. We are putting together a task force, civilian embedded, working with the federal investigation, specifically focused on the hospital network, identifying remaining Lund-placed personnel, reviewing the 2 accidental deaths, building the evidentiary chain that connects each facility to the central operation. She paused. I want you on it. Not as a federal agent, as a clinical consultant, your nursing credentials intact, your military background finally acknowledged rather than hidden. You would be doing exactly what you've been doing for 2 years, except with the right people behind you and the right resources available. The corner booth was quiet. Outside, a truck went by on the main road. Dara watched the window and the truck and then looked back at Marsh. I have a job, she said. You have the job that nearly cost you your license because you were doing it alone. I have patients. The patients in 6 hospitals whose doctors may have been compromised also need someone paying attention. Marsh said it without pushing, just placing it. I'm not asking you to leave nursing. I'm asking you to do it with your eyes open and your real background on the table for the first time since you separated. Dara was quiet for long enough that the waitress came by and refilled their coffee without being asked, looked at both of them, decided this was not a conversation to interrupt, and left without speaking. I need to think about it, Dara said. I know. Marsh picked up her mug. I'm here until Thursday. She went back to the hospital because there were things that needed doing, and she had never been good at sitting with a decision when there was work available. Bev Tolliver was at the nursing station looking like someone who'd been through a significant event and was processing it by restocking supply carts, which Dara recognized as a coping strategy because she'd used it herself. The committee's official finding is being typed up, Bev said, without looking up from the supply count. Cass admin told me it'll be on record by end of day. She paused. Talcott hasn't left the building. Legal is in with him and 2 federal agents on the 4th floor. I know. Addison Clare cried in the break room for 20 minutes. Bev looked up. Not because she liked him, because she realized she'd been administering medications he'd authorized for 2 years, and now she's wondering which ones were what he said they were. Dara felt that. The specific vertigo of discovering that the ground you've been standing on was never what you thought it was. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just the quiet, sick feeling of recalibration. Pull his prescribing records from the last year, she said. All of them. Get Park to review them with you. Flag anything that looks inconsistent with the patient's documented condition. She paused. It's going to be a long list. Do it anyway. Bev nodded. She didn't look frightened by the scope of it, just resolved. The expression of someone who has decided that the only way out is through. Dara went to room 14. Hale was upright, genuinely upright this time, not the careful performance of managed consciousness he'd been maintaining. His color was better, his pressure on the bedside monitor reading numbers that were approaching acceptable. He still looked like a man who'd nearly died twice in 48 hours, because he was one, but the particular grayness of acute hemorrhage had lifted and what was underneath it was more recognizably him. Alert, assessing, holding himself with the contained energy of someone managing physical limitation through sheer force of practiced habit. He looked at her when she came in and said, "Talcott's being arrested." I heard. Fess gave them the O2 valve installation in his statement. They have Talcott on the maintenance log and Fess's testimony. That's enough for the federal charge. He watched her. You don't look like someone who just won. I look like someone who's tired, she said, and sat in the chair. The chair that Lund had sat in, the chair she'd pulled up herself 2 nights ago. It was just a chair now, the associations already fading into the ordinary. Marsh wants me on the task force. Hale was quiet for a moment. Adrienne Marsh. You know her. I know of her. She's been running the network investigation from the military side for 8 months. He considered. She's good. Difficult to work for, I've heard, but good. I haven't decided yet. You've mostly decided, he said. You're just checking whether the decision is right. She looked at him. How do you know that? Because you came in here to tell me about it instead of calling Wick or going home. He shifted slightly. The careful repositioning of someone whose midsection had recently been opened and closed. You came to someone who's been doing this work, to see how it looks from the outside. That was accurate enough that she didn't deny it. How does it look? She said. Like the right thing and also a hard thing, he said. Those are usually the same thing. You know that better than I do. She sat with that for a while. The monitors ran. Down the hall, somewhere, a family was talking to a doctor about something unrelated to any of this. Just ordinary hospital life, ordinary fear and information, and the daily work of trying to keep people alive. The 2 deaths, she said. The ones ruled accidental. We'll find what happened, he said. I want to be the one reviewing the clinical records. She said it not as a request, but as a statement of intent. Not because I don't trust your investigators. Because whoever those patients were, they deserve someone who understands what the records actually mean. Hale nodded once. I'll make sure Marsh knows that's a condition. She stood up, looked at his chart one more time out of professional reflex, pressure, oxygen saturation, the remaining medication drips running at the corrected rates, all of it within parameters. She'd check again before she left. When do you transfer? She asked. Tomorrow morning, if I continue improving? He paused. They're taking me to a federal medical facility in Denver. I'll be there 6 weeks minimum while they decide what to do with me and the information I carry. A pause. After that, I don't know. This job has a way of deciding what comes next for you. I know something about that, she said. She was at the door when he said, Moss. She stopped. What you did in that trauma bay, he said, not the ultrasound, not the clinical call. I mean staying at that door while they operated, staying in this building after they took your badge, going down to that supply corridor." He paused, and the pause had weight. "That wasn't training. That was choice. Every time." He looked at her steadily. "Don't let anyone make you small for it. Not ever again." She didn't answer him right away. There was something in what he'd said that she needed to hold correctly. Not sentimental, not dismissed, just held. "Take care of your incision site," she said. "The splenic repair is going to be tender for 6 weeks. Don't let the Denver team talk you into early activity protocols." A sound came from him that was almost a laugh. She went back to work. The formal arrest of Dr. Reeves Talcott at Harlow Creek Regional happened at 2:47 p.m. in the 4th floor administrative corridor, and it was witnessed by 12 people, including 2 nurses, a radiology technician, 3 administrative staff, and a facilities manager who'd been on his way to fix a leaking tap and stopped when he saw the federal agents come out of the conference room. Talcott walked out between them with his hands in front of him and his face arranged in the expression of someone who was performing dignity under pressure. The jaw set, the eyes forward, the deliberate unbowing of a man who understood, at this particular moment, that the only thing left to him was how he carried himself. He was good at it. Even now, he was good at it. But the 12 people in that corridor saw it. They saw the handcuffs, and they saw the agents, and they saw a man who had run that building's surgical department for 4 years walking out of it in federal custody, and there was no version of that image that could be managed or reframed or contained. Bev Tolliver was one of the 12. She told Dara about it afterward in the break room over terrible coffee, describing each detail with the precise recall of someone who had been storing up the moment as it happened, knowing she'd need to recount it accurately. "He didn't look at anyone," Bev said. "Just forward. Like if he didn't look at us, we weren't really there." "We were there," Dara said. "Yes." Bev wrapped her mug in both hands. "We were." The news moved through the hospital in the way news always moves through closed institutions. Fast, distorted at the edges, accurate at the center. By 4 p.m., every department had heard something. By 5, the hospital's board had issued a brief internal statement confirming that Dr. Talcott had been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending investigation, and that the federal authorities had the full cooperation of Harlow Creek Regional Medical Center. The statement did not mention Dara by name. The state nursing board's communication arrived in her email at 4:33 p.m., a formal notification that the referral filed by Dr. Talcott had been reviewed and, in light of the findings of the committee hearing and the initiation of a federal investigation into the integrity of the originating documentation, was being withdrawn pending a completed review that was expected to formally close the matter without findings against the licensee. It was bureaucratic language for, "The referral is gone, and it was never real." She read it twice. Then she put her phone in her pocket and finished restocking the supply cart she'd taken over from Bev 40 minutes ago, because the cart needed doing, and she was there. Renata Voss called at 6 p.m. Dara was in her car in the parking lot, engine running for the heat, eating a granola bar she'd been saving since morning. "The board called me," Voss said. Her voice was different than it had been in the hallway. Not lighter, exactly. More like something that had been compressed was beginning to decompress, slowly, not all at once. "They said they're reopening my case, for formal resolution." A pause. I kept the documents because I believed it would matter eventually, but I didn't actually let myself believe it would happen in my lifetime." "It's happening now," Dara said. 3 years. Voss said it flat, not accusatory, just factual. "I want you to understand what 3 years looks like. I worked home health. Good people, genuinely. But I was an OR nurse. That's what I trained for. That's what I was." Another pause. "I need you to know I'm not okay about the 3 years. I'm grateful for now, but I'm not pretending the 3 years didn't happen." "I wouldn't ask you to," Dara said. "No." A quiet. "I know. That's why I called you instead of the lawyer." After the call ended, Dara sat in the parking lot for a while longer than she needed to, the heat running, the Montana dark coming down fast the way it did in October, the mountains going black against a sky that was still faintly luminous at the western edge. She thought about Renata Voss working home health for 3 years. She thought about Patricia Delk, whoever she was, leaving a hostile work environment and possibly not knowing why things had gone wrong or whether it had been her fault. She thought about the two people who had died in clinical failures that were not failures at all, and the families who'd been told that medicine was imperfect, and sometimes people didn't survive, and there was nothing to be done. She thought about all of that, and she sat with the full weight of it without looking for a way to make it feel better, because some things shouldn't feel better. Some things should just be known and carried correctly. Then she drove home. She called Marsh on a Wednesday morning. "I have conditions," she said, standing in her kitchen with real coffee for the first time in 3 days. She'd bought proper beans the night before as a specific, deliberate act of normalcy. "I expected you would," Marsh said. "I maintain my nursing position at Harlow Creek. The task force work fits around clinical hours. I'm not a full-time federal consultant. I'm a nurse who consults. That line stays clear." Agreed. The 2 accidental deaths. I review the clinical records personally before any federal summary is written. Whatever I find, I report directly, without a filter. Agreed. And Renata Vos's license restoration gets expedited, not as a favor, as a condition. If the federal investigation can move the state board on my referral in less than 24 hours, it can move the board on hers. A pause. Longer than the others. "That's not in my direct authority," Marsh said carefully. "Then find whose authority it's in and make the call." Dara's voice was even and final. "She lost 3 years. That's not recoverable. But the license is, and the timeline is movable if someone applies the right pressure. I need that to happen before I sign anything." Another pause. "I'll make the call today," Marsh said. "Then we have a conversation to finish," Dara said. "I'll come to you." She was back at work the following Monday. The badge was new. Her old one had been logged as surrendered, and the system required a replacement rather than a reissue, which meant a new photograph, a new card, her name in the same font, on the same pale blue background that every other nurse at Harlow Creek wore. It looked identical to the one she'd handed over at the nursing station 8 days ago. It was not the same thing. The trauma bay looked the same. The supply carts, the overhead lighting, the particular way the morning shift handed off to the day team, with the controlled urgency of people moving a lot of critical information in a short time. Dara took her position at the secondary bay and went through her checklist and helped a resident talk through a medication calculation and restocked 2 supply drawers that someone on nights had depleted without logging, and she did all of it with the grounded ordinariness of someone who has been away from a thing they're good at and come back to find it still there. Dr. Una Park found her at the nursing station at 10 a.m. "I wanted to say something to you last week," Park said. She was still the same compact, precise person from the OR. But there was something different in how she was holding herself, something that had been recalibrated. "I didn't. I was still processing," she paused. "The credential anomaly. The order under my name. I've been thinking about it, about what would have happened if Troy Bast hadn't flagged the drip rate." "Bast did flag it," Dara said. "I know, but what if he hadn't?" Park looked at her directly. "I've been practicing anesthesiology for 11 years. I have never once considered that an order in my name might not be from me, that someone might be using my access to—" She stopped. "It changes things. The way you think about the system, the way you trust it." "The system deserves scrutiny," Dara said. "That's not a bad thing to know." "No." Park was quiet for a moment. "You were right in that trauma bay, the first day. You were right, and he was wrong, and I stood there and said nothing because he was the chief of surgery, and you were—" "A nurse," Dara said. "Yes." Park said it without deflection. "I'm sorry for that." Dara looked at her. Park's face had the open discomfort of someone making an honest accounting, and there was something in it worth meeting directly. "Next time you see something that doesn't look right," Dara said, "say it." "I will," Park said, and she meant it. There are things they don't tell you when you separate from service. They tell you about the transition assistance programs, and the VA resources, and the civilian employment pathways, and what they don't tell you is that the skills you built in the worst conditions of your life don't disappear when you change clothes. They go with you. They live in your hands and your eyes, and the particular way your brain processes a room when you walk into it, the automatic threat and resource calculation that was trained into you over years, and that no discharge paperwork can fully undo. Dara had spent 2 years treating that as a liability, something to suppress, something that didn't belong in a civilian hospital, something that might make her strange or difficult, the fear underneath all the other fears, the kind of person who stood out in a way that would eventually cost her. What she understood now, sitting in the nursing station at 11 a.m. with her new badge on her lanyard and the trauma bay quiet and the October mountains visible through the window at the end of the hall, was that she had been wrong about that. Not in a simple or comfortable way. There was no version of what had happened in the last 8 days that felt simple or comfortable. People had died before she got here. A woman had lost 3 years of her career. A federal operative had nearly been killed in a hospital bed. None of that had a clean resolution, a tidy moral that wrapped the damage into something instructive and left the damage itself behind. But she had been wrong about herself, about what she was. She was a nurse. She was also everything she'd been before she was a nurse, and those two things had never actually been separate. She'd just agreed for a long time to pretend they were, because it felt safer, and because the institution she was in had given her every incentive to stay small and quiet and uncomplicated. The man in that trauma bay had needed both versions of her at the same time, and she had given him both without thinking about it, out of pure reflex, because people in trouble get everything you have or they don't get saved. That was not something to suppress. That was something to show up with. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Wick. Lund was detained at a private airfield outside Denver this morning. Warrant served. He's in federal custody. A pause. Then, thought you'd want to know. She typed back, thank you. Then, the two names above Lund. His response took a minute. Being processed. It's going to be a long road. Then, but it started in that trauma bay. She put the phone down. Troy Bast came through the nursing station on his way off shift. He'd worked a double and looked it, his eyes slightly glazed with the particular flatness of someone running on fumes and coffee. He stopped when he saw her. You're back, he said. Not surprised, just noting it. I'm back. He nodded, and there was something in it. Not ceremony, just acknowledgement. The small human recognition of a thing that matters between people who don't fully articulate things. He went to clock out. The next case came in at 11:40. A ranch worker with a hand injury from a piece of equipment, in pain and embarrassed about it the way working men sometimes were, trying to minimize the blood soaking through the bandage his coworker had wrapped around his palm. Dara met him at the bay door with a fresh trauma kit and the specific manner of someone who was going to take the injury seriously without making him feel foolish about it. Let's take a look, she said. She didn't think about Lund in federal custody. She didn't think about the task force paperwork sitting in her kitchen waiting for her signature. She didn't think about Talcott, who was in a federal holding facility working through arraignment with a legal team that was going to be very expensive and ultimately insufficient. She didn't think about any of it. She looked at the wound, assessed the damage, and got to work. That was what she'd always been. Not half of something, not a secret kept from itself. The whole thing, present in the room, using every part of what she knew. There is a particular kind of strength that the world misidentifies as compliance, the kind that keeps its voice low and its head down and its paperwork in order and does the right thing even when the right thing is going to cost something real. People look at that quality and they call it patience, or they call it professionalism, or they call it, if they're being dismissive, being a good little nurse who follows the rules. What it actually is something much harder than defiance. Defiance is easy. Defiance gets loud and breaks things and makes sure everyone knows it's in the room. The harder thing, the thing Dara had done in that trauma bay and in that supply corridor and in that hearing room, is to stay steady, to stay accurate, to hold on to what you know is true while everything around you is being arranged to make you doubt it. That kind of strength doesn't announce itself. It just keeps showing up. She cleaned the wound, assessed the tendon integrity, consulted the hand surgeon, and made sure her patient left that bay with a clear understanding of his injury and his options and what came next. He thanked her on his way out, slightly gruffly, the way people thank you when they're not quite used to accepting help. And she nodded and went back to her station and picked up the next chart. Outside, the October sky above the Montana mountains was the particular blue that only exists at altitude, absolute and clean and indifferent to everything that happens beneath it. The mountains didn't care about committee hearings or federal warrants or the difference between who you'd been and who you'd become. But Dara cared. That had always been the whole point. She cared, and she stayed, and she did not make herself smaller for anyone's comfort again.